Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to May's governing body meeting held in public, which is being live streamed on YouTube. So before we continue with the rest of the meeting, we have apologies for absence from Brian Hughes, Amir Afzal and Nikki Bates. I'll now move us on to checking the quoracy of the meeting. So I'll just confirm with Kath Tilney that we are quorate. We have 4 GPs, we have our executive team -1 and 3 of the 4 lay members as it stands. So Kath, are you happy to confirm we're quorate to go ahead? Thank you. Alan, your hand has popped up. Was there anything you wanted to add? No, hand's gone back down. Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to share a slide. It's just to remind members of the public that you are able and very welcome to submit questions to the governing body about our business. The form is available for you to submit your questions. That's available on our CCG website, which is sheffieldccg.nhs.uk. We do encourage and ask members of the public to either email that form into us, or if you prefer, you are able to send it in by post. And the details are here on screen, and I'll leave those up for a few minutes, and we'll broadcast that slide again at the end so that you can pick up on those details. But I just want to ask Kath, have we had any members of the public submitting questions for this meeting?
No, we haven't.
Okay, perfect. So I will now move us on then to the approval of the minutes of the previous governing body meeting. So I'm just going to close that background off. Okay, so I will take comments by exception, page by page. So if there are any amendments or matters of accuracy you wish to raise, please raise your hand and inform me as we go through. So on pages 1 and 2, 3 and 4, pages 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10, 11 and 12, 13 and 14, 15 and 16, 17 and 18, and finally page 19. Okay, so no matters of accuracy have been brought up there, so we will declare those minutes as a true and accurate reflection of the last governing body. So before we move on then to the main agenda and matters arising, do any members of governing body have any declarations of interest to make at this stage? Nope, thank you. So we'll now move on to paper B in your noting pack, which is matters arising from the last governing body meeting. So I'll run through these one by one, relevant to those items that are still open. We currently have three open items on the matters arising, and the remaining are all recommended for closure. So the first matter arising is item 12219 regarding the renaming of the boardroom. That will remain open until such time we return to working in the building. Item 13720 around the NHS Sheffield CCG operating plan and commissioning intentions. We will be receiving an oral update on that today in governing body. And then the final open item, which is 3621, the month 10 performance and delivery report. There was a request that Judy Thorley, lay member for quality assurance, was to arrange a meeting with chief nurse. We've got that item as still open, as of last week. I'm just wondering whether Judy or Alan could just give us an update on where we are with that.
Thank you, Chair. I did a terrible job at the beginning of trying to record Judy's absence at the at public governing body today. She's become unwell quite suddenly, and so I sent us apologies. So could we record those? And secondly, we have myself and Judy haven't had the opportunity to discuss, and so we're suggesting that that remains open until next time, if that's possible.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So Carol, could we note that and pick that up after the meeting? Okay, so we've got two further members of governing body rejoining us, so we'll just give them a moment to rejoin before we move on. Okay, so next item on the agenda is our patient story. So I'm going to hand over to Alan Windle to introduce that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Today's story is from a resident of Sheffield, also called Alan, and he's going to be talking about his perspective of accessing the COVID vaccine as someone who is registered blind. Alan and his wife received the vaccination through the COVID vaccination programme run by Primary Care in Sheffield. And I just want to say, before we start, we're grateful to Alan for sharing his story and his wife's experience with us, and Disability Sheffield who put us in contact with him. I think it's over to Lucy for the video.
I'll share the video. Thank you.
I live in Sheffield, always lived in Sheffield, registered blind. I've been a guide dog user for 21, 22 years. To answer the question of being invited for a vaccination, certainly seen a little bit more. Both myself and my partner are both registered blind. I'm in the 55 and above age bracket. My partner is in the under the 50s age bracket. However, my partner is classed as my carer, even though she is still registered blind. And she got her invite letter first, print letter to a blind person. About a week later, I received my print letter. At this time, we'd not had any text message, no alternative communication. So 2 print letters had come. Because I'm self-employed, I do have an admin worker. In the first part of the lockdown, did not come to the house at all. So mail did build up. But recently she has been coming. We've got to work. So she was reading our letters and told us we got these invites. Thought of doing it, we actually rang the GP surgery on the Friday, explained what had been going off, and they said they were able to offer a vaccination. So appointment was made for the first vaccination for both myself and my partner to go together, both being registered blind, going to an unfamiliar place. In the time from making that appointment and going for the appointment, Sandra had been having one of the 2 problems, blood tests and so on, so was advised not to have the vaccination. So I went with a friend who was kind of to drive us there, or drive me there, to a surgery which is totally unfamiliar to myself. We went down the weekend before just to assess where the place was. So our friend knew where he was going and different things. So I went for the appointment. When we got there, there was no problem. I went with a white stick, even though I'm a guide dog user, just to reduce things and whatever inconvenience. Went with a white stick. got there, and the human side of things, that was excellent. The people were accommodating when I needed guiding. When we were doing the social distancing in the queue, they were explaining when to move forward. Not a problem. So I had the vaccination, went home. Then Sandra got the all clear. Sandra's my partner, got the all clear. So we rebooked for her to have the vaccination. Completely different venue. So friend again took us to the appointment. Same thing, the human element was good. People were guiding where was needed, and so on. And that whole thing went through quite nicely. To make the experience easier for us to do things with our vaccinations was I think the initial step of the communication with us. 2 print letters to 2 blind people who were allegedly not supposed to have people in our homes. We were lucky because of the care type element. We were having a person come in, but that's only once a week. So having print letters does not necessarily work. We need that communication from the NHS in our preferred format, whether that's Braille or text message. Last little point of this is we were given a card which says we've had a vaccination only because the friend actually told us what it said on the card. It's just a little slip of paper. So we know what we had, what vaccination we had, we got it there, but we can't refer back to that because it's not in an accessible format. Yeah. Also, the leaflets that are given out with the vaccination, we also could do with some form of being able to look up that ISBN code or whatever's on that document so we can actually go online and read it for ourselves, not just having the snippets and highlights told to us by a friend. And again, that also goes further across the board, looking at side effects of medication and just general medication from the NHS and preparation for operations and things. It's no good it just being sent out as a print letter leaflet. If that was a text message or somebody being able to write it down in Braille, or even just having a card what has Braille on it with the ISBN number, so type it into a search engine, see what we can find. All that has got to make the future of our NHS.
Again, thank you to the individuals involved in organisations in hearing this story, and it does show that there's work to do on the accessible information standards that we expect of providers. Notwithstanding, the primary care in PCNs in delivery of the vaccine in early stages did work with Disability Sheffield, and we did do some work and links, and learning came from that review on accessible information and how practices and support, and the Mass Vaccination Centre, we supported that review as well on how we would support people with disabilities in gaining access. I think an action for us as a governing body is to, again, take the learning from this patient story experience and work through with our provider organisations on how they can meet that accessible information standard to support our individuals in communities with disabilities to access services.
Thank you, Alan. So do we have any comments? So Judy and then Greg, please.
Yes, thank you, Alan. And it really illustrates an issue that Healthwatch finds a lot of the time. And it's certainly blind people, but deaf people being telephoned, people who have English as a second language being sent really quite complicated letters. So there's a whole set of issues around communication and access to services. So I really welcome looking at those standards, but Healthwatch is getting that message consistently over the last year with COVID, and it hasn't gone away. So I think there is something quite urgent about doing that. And I think there are a lot of organisations who can help with that. The Race Equality Commission, for example. Thank you.
Thanks. Greg, please.
Thanks. Just brief observation. So I agree with Alan's suggestion wholeheartedly. It's rare that many public bodies do a really good job on accessible information, to be fair. So sadly not terribly surprising. I agree with Alan's suggestion 100%. For me, the story was really helpful and insightful. It kind of underscored the point of people being able to go to and be invited by primary care as opposed to a distant site X miles away. And I think as we roll forward with the COVID vaccination, the more that we can do that, the better it will be, notwithstanding the point about kind of systematizing the general accessibility of information.
Thank you, Greg. David Warwicker, please.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking this might be another opportunity to show that we're working with BCF sector partners to commission services, and this follows on from our work with the council and the rest of the Wellbeing Board to really show that we are getting involving our partners in the BCF sector when we're commissioning services for patients. In fact, I would ask if I could hear some news about how we've done that in this case. Maybe bring that back or something so that we've got a story that we can tell of how we've made this better and by involving BCF partners.
Thank you, David, and apologies for the quality of the sound there. So, Mark, please.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a funny position because obviously we're going through a period of significant transition within the city over the next year. But I think it highlights that we could do more in terms of ensuring that people who are not good at actually being in touch with and making the system easy to access systematically, that those voices are heard more coherently. So I think, we heard the person who is deaf, we heard their story, and we've now heard this one. But as I think someone said earlier, it also applies to people who might struggle because English isn't their first language. And I just wonder whether we've got the structures right in the city, and noting David's point as well, with regard to ensuring that there's that sort of consistent supportive challenge coming through into the health system about how we're testing, how we're engaged, how we're making ourselves accessible to people. And I'm not listening to what we've heard. It seems to me that there's a sort of it's not good enough to be relying on individuals saying this was my experience and things could be better. We actually need something that's a little bit more systemic going forward. And I just wonder whether we should be giving some thought to how we can lock that in a bit better over the forthcoming year. I'm particularly thinking about things like the place-based, the provider partnerships and everything else that are developing.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Nikki Normington, please.
Thanks, yeah. Not putting this across in an excuse in any way, but I also think we have to accept the speed of the rollout of this COVID programme for general practice to deliver. Unfortunately, we roll it out at such speed and such a size that we did. Things like this are always going to happen. I think it's about learning from this and making sure stuff like this doesn't happen in the future. But there's got to be acceptance that the speed of the rollout was unprecedented.
Thanks, Nikki. useful and relevant comment with the speed. So I've just written a few notes down watching that video, and it's almost sort of kind of heartwarming to hear that the human elements of this were really positive experiences. But the bit where, you know, kind of as a system it fell short was around that initial communication, communicating with people in their preferred formats or preferred manner. But it did also raise some other questions. So, you know, the clinicians around the room here will have quite strong views on people making informed choices, informed consent, and having full information about the treatment they're receiving. And obviously that's an area where that standard may fall short. So I do think I'm in agreement with Alan that we should be pushing for accessible information standards as a universal kind of acceptance and method across Sheffield, and we should really be bringing that back to future governing bodies and playing that into the other spaces where we have influence, so particularly into our partnerships in Sheffield, into our Health and Wellbeing Board, and also into our system, so our integrated care system. Okay, thank you, Alan, and would you pass our thanks on to Alan in the video, and pass on the feedback that we've discussed as well. So thank you very much, Alan. Okay, item 8 on the agenda, that's paper C in the noting packs, is the adoption of the NHS Sheffield CCG unaudited financial accounts for 2020 and 2021 and the finance report for month 12. So over to Jackie Mills, please.
Thank you, Terry. So I'm Jackie Mills, Director of Finance at CCG. I just wanted to introduce this item by reflecting that clearly 2020-21 was a unique year, and clearly in terms of the pandemic, but also from a financial perspective. It's been a bit of a roller coaster year. So we started the financial year with the suspension of the normal financial framework for the NHS. Our providers were moved on to nationally calculated block contracts with top-ups, and we initially started the first 4 months with an arrangement where we would be funded based on our actual spend. Those arrangements were extended into month 6, and then we moved into the second half of the year with nationally calculated fixed allocations. However, soon after that, quite a significant amount of additional funding did begin to flow from central budgets. So it was a strange year, and I think the biggest risks that we've managed over, the financial risks that we've managed over that period, has been a level of uncertainty and limits to our ability to plan for ongoing investments as a result of those short planning frames. But I am pleased to report that we did make progress over that period. We did invest in a number of areas, and we've also been able to deliver a balanced financial position at the end of the year. So as the report highlights, we have submitted our annual accounts to NHS England in line with the national timetable. So I want to say a big thank you to the finance team in terms of delivering a second year of producing accounts in a virtual way. Yeah, the amount of work that takes shouldn't be underestimated. So big thank you for the team. I'm pleased to report that, as I said, we achieved a balanced position in line with that we've been forecasting and reporting to the governing body. So the report, as presented, takes you through those accounts and the issues in each of the statements. So there wasn't anything in particular that I wanted to draw out, but I'm happy to take any questions on that. And then just to note that the next steps are that the auditors are on site virtually at the moment. We are expecting that they will complete their review of the accounts in time for the audit committee, which is scheduled for the 20th of May. So the audit committee will receive the final audited accounts and the auditors report on those. And then we expect to meet as a governing body on the afternoon of the 20th of May to formally receive the accounts and sign those off. So I don't think there's anything anything else that I particularly want to draw out from the report, but as I said, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Chris Neild, please.
I've just had a query about the continuing healthcare. So we funded extra during the pandemic and had some overspend. I just wondered about the implications for if somebody received funding because we had some extra resource, and what's the position, you know, as that resource is reduced, and will they have it and then not, and so on. So just, I mean, it's got some detail in it about some has increased and some has reduced. So if you could just say a bit more about it so I understand it a bit better, thanks.
Yeah. So there were a number of things happening in terms of continuing healthcare. So if I touch on the change in the temporary change in the arrangements over the summer period. So initially, people that were discharged from hospital received funding for their care. And that was whether it was NHS provided care or social care. They were funded for that until they'd had a review of their packages. So the majority of those reviews were completed before the end of March. So everyone should be transferred onto a normal package of care. In terms of anyone that was discharged from hospital post the summer, so from September onwards, they were funded for the first 6 weeks of that care, but with an expectation that those packages would be reviewed after 6 weeks, and again moved on to a normal funding basis. The NHS England and Improvement have confirmed that those arrangements will continue for the first half of the year. So initially for 6 weeks of care, but then moving down to 4 weeks of care up to the end of September, but we're not clear of the arrangements post-September. So it's been a changing environment, and it's been a testament to our continuing healthcare team as well as our colleagues in the council in terms of being able to manage that, and I think they've done that well. Just generally in other pressures within our continuing healthcare budget that wasn't funded from the hospital discharge funding, we have had significant pressures, particularly in end-of-life care. So the palliative care packages that we put in place, there's been a significant growth in those. That growth has started to come down, but not back to previous levels of demand. So it is an area that we continue to monitor, and we have had increasing numbers of packages coming through CHC as well. And similarly, and you'll note through our report on the Better Care Fund, there's been pressures in adult social care and children's social care as well at the same time. So it's generally an area of growth, and will cause us some issues that we'll need to pay attention to going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. That's useful, and it's really good that they caught up with assessing the needs of the people that got the initial amount. And Alan's nodding. I did have some experience of going out to observe some of that work, and there was some really innovative practice in the whole system. So I hope that helped in this situation. Alan's nodding, so I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Lee Sorsby, please.
Hi, yes, I'm Lee Sorsby, GP on governing body. Jackie, as ever, thank you to you and your team for an amazing piece of work in really, really difficult circumstances. I've just got 2 points. One is just an observation. The other is an illustration of a yawning black hole in my knowledge, which I think should be laser incisive because I think it's really important. So the observation is on the prescribing 2.16 on page 10, talking about the growth in items prescribed has stayed at a low rate and is similar to last year, which I think actually is really welcome, because from memory during the year with the changes in the way that we were working, particularly in primary care, from memory, I think that it seemed that the number of items was going up. which was a bit of a worry. And it's quite refreshing and encouraging to see that actually it is still going up, but at a similar rate that it was before, despite the seismic changes in the way that general practice is working. So that's encouraging to me. The yawning black hole in my knowledge, one of many, I'm sure, is the Better Care Fund. And I just feel as I was reading the report, I was thinking this is really important, and I'm not quite sure that I grasp it. So if it's just me, then maybe you and I need to have a one-to-one. Or if it's all of us, maybe we need to think about a development session, because it's such a key part of our finance, and it's a key part of the future for us going forward in terms of bringing health and social care together. And in a really crude way, when we first sort of established the Better Care Fund, I was thinking this could work because, crudely, NHS has quite a lot of money relative to social care, but not a lot of power in terms of the constraints that are put on how we spend that money. Whereas the local authority don't have quite so much money, but they do have a lot more autonomy in how it's spent, because that's how it seems anyway. And so potentially this could be a win-win or a lose-lose. And so it seemed like it is a really interesting aspect. But as I was thinking all this through and thinking, I need to really understand how this is going to work going forward, given the differences in overspend and how that might be brought together if it is a truly pooled budget, and how are we going to manage that, and how are we going to understand that. But then, of course, the light dawned. I thought, but what about the brave new world of the ICS, and where does commissioning sit? And so I suppose my question is, what's going to happen to the BCF going forward, and how do we understand it working in the next few years? And then we can think about, well, how do we bring together health and social care and the overspends and the underspend? Do you see what I mean? So I'm sorry, it's one of my very rambling questions, but it is my ignorance.
I don't think it is your ignorance, Lee, actually, because I think it is a level of uncertainty that we have at the moment. So I think the commitment to the BCF remains, irrespective of CCGs or ICSs, that the commitment's there. And the mechanism remains in terms of having a partnership agreement between a health body and the local authority. So that's given. I think the area of uncertainty is, what does that mean? What will that translate into in a new world? And we'll sit with an agreement around accountability and delegation within an ICS, which is a live conversation we are currently having. So I think it is one for the governing body to have some consideration about. So I think probably a suggestion about picking it up through a development session is probably the right one, because there's a significant amount of work that we have done jointly with our council colleagues, and I think that gives us the underpinnings to be able to develop and take that forward. So I think we've got a strong start, but we need to be able to influence where we end up with that.
So could we
come in at this? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say. So I mean, I think it'd be really helpful I would really appreciate being able to understand this a lot better than I do, I think, because I think it could be foundational to what the future looks like. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And we'll put that down for a development session in the coming months. I think, as Jackie's alluded to, there is a little bit of uncertainty about the exact mechanisms, but there's a commitment for those things to remain. So important that we pick that up and indeed continue to have that dialogue with our elected members and officers in the local authority as well. Okay, could I bring in Mark Gamsu, please?
Yeah, thank you. And I didn't say who I am. I'm Mark Gamsu, lay member and Deputy Chair of the Clinical Commissioning Group. A couple of things. One, just building on what Lee has said, which I agree with completely, in terms of I agree that she's confused about this. But I agree actually that it would be really helpful if things were clearer. Not least because I think we need to be clear with the public about the potential of this fund and the opportunities it creates, and also some of the stressors within it. And I think if we're struggling to be clear ourselves, then we can't hold ourselves to account to the public and in terms of how this funding is utilised. But sort of following on from that, later in the report, Jackie, you talk about, there's a very useful line, which is that we've achieved a 21.9 million prior year surplus, as well as a £3 million surplus for the ICS, which I'm sure they're very grateful for. And the again, I think the issue there is, what does that really mean? And I think, again, it's a public issue, because from past experience, so people look at that and go, gosh, you've got lots of money and you've generated a fantastic surplus. But quite often this funding disappears back upwards and we never see it again. So are you able to just give a little picture about what does that surplus mean?
Yeah, so although the surplus is reported within our financial position, we are unable to access that without the prior agreement of NHS England. And historically, it's been quite difficult to gain that agreement, because it's been, there've been multiple, there's been significant amount of cumulative surpluses built up by numerous CCGs. And so the pecking order in which people get to access that is primarily historically driven by who's got the most challenging financial circumstances, rather than really proposals for how we would use that money. So historically, that's been the position. My understanding, and again, it's one of the issues that we're seeking clarity on, my understanding is through the arrangements as set out for the transfer of CCG responsibilities into ICSs, is that surplus would also, the historic surpluses would also transfer to ICSs. So that is my working assumption at the moment. But as I say, it is an area that we're seeking clarification on. But that's my expectation. Okay,
can I just then, my working assumption would be that if it transfers over to integrated care systems, that might mean that in South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw, we would have more say over how that funding is spent going forward. That's my working assumption. Is that, do you think I'm right to have that working assumption, Jackie?
I think the ICS would still need to seek approval of the regional or national finance teams to access that funding. So I think it will be the same issues that we've had historically, just fewer numbers of ICSs would be having that conversation with the national team.
Thank you.
Thank you. John McElwraith, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to comment about the Better Care Fund, of course, the Joint Commissioning Committee has been created to oversee the work of the Better Care Fund. It has a single commissioning plan. It's working on the outcomes framework and has been getting into those conversations around the effectiveness of the spend in terms of the realisation of the difference for the people of Sheffield. And the returns to government are signed off by the co-chairs of the Health and Wellbeing Board. And the point in essence I'm making is the primacy of place and the opportunity to continue to drive the conversation, regardless of the ICS, around the place called Sheffield. So, but I thought that might be helpful for Lee's benefit too.
Thanks, John. I think it sort of is on my list just to bring back to governing body attention there is we have seen in previous governing bodies those joint commissioning intentions come through, which have been formed with Sheffield City Council through the Joint Commissioning Committee, and indeed we will be hearing more about that and the health inequalities framework that we're developing over the coming months through this committee. So there is a link back, but I do take Lee's point that we probably ought to have a development session so we can be much clearer as an organisation about what that means and where it goes in the future. So I'll take one final bit of input from Leslie Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. Leslie Smith, Accountable Officer for the CCG. I think you probably just referenced what I was going to say, Terry, which was linking us back to the previous presentation we had at Governing Body with colleagues from the Council about our pooled budget and our joint commissioning intentions. And remember, if we think back to that day, we referenced actually, this is probably a jewel in our crown. I think it's the largest pooled budget in England. And I think it serves Sheffield well for the current year and going into future years. If we think about the white paper and the proposals, there are many references to joint committees and pooled budgets and pooling place funding in that way. And John referenced the primacy of place. So even looking through an ICS lens, having that joint governance and joint work in a place will be really important in terms of delegation agreements. So agree it'd be useful to do a forthcoming development session on this, but probably just recognising the opportunity that we do have for Sheffield and Sheffield people within our grasp building and what the work that's gone into the joint commissioning intentions and pulling the resource that lies behind.
Thank you, Leslie. Okay, so governing body has been asked to do two things with this paper. The first one is in relation to Part A, and that is to formally adopt the unaudited 2020/21 accounts. So I will take agreement on that by exception. Okay, so Jackie, point A, adopted by governing body. And then the second bit was to note the final 2020/21 outturn position for the CCG, which I think we have given some discussion to. But before we finish that item, is there any other points of note that anybody wishes to raise? Nope, thank you. So I'll now move us on to the next item. So item 9, paper D in the noting packs, and that is the Sheffield CCG draft annual report for 2020/21. Just request that we receive feedback from governing body as part of that approval, and also to note that the full annual report in its final form will be coming to the governing body meeting on the 20th of May. So just to be mindful that we pick up on the essence of the document and feed in any additions and amendments we feel for that annual report, but we will be receiving and approving the final version in 2 weeks' time. So I'll hand over to Kath Tilney, please.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I'm Kath Tilney, the Associate Director of Corporate Services. And so we have a statutory requirement to produce the annual report, and the contents of it is largely mandated. So a lot of the words in there are recept from up on high. As Terry said, in the information pack, you've got the draft report, and a big thank you to the team that have pulled that together. And it's been quite a cathartic experience bringing it all together and just sort of seeing how much we have managed to achieve during what's been a very difficult year. So what I'm asking of governing body is there anything really key that you think's missing, or are there any factual inaccuracies in that? That'd be really helpful if you could share that with me. You'll probably see there's a few yellow highlights in it and the page numbers aren't done, and I'm sure there are some typos in it because it was bits of it were pulled together at the last minute. We will be going through it with a fine-tooth comb. There's a number of us lined up to do that, so just be aware of that. It is draft, but it's just that essence of do you think there's anything missing or any inaccuracies? And as Terry said, we're going to be coming back with the final version for approval, and we're going to invite some staff to come and share that with us and celebrate together what we've achieved. So that's something we'll be doing on the 20th of May.
Okay, thank you, Kath. So just noting what's been said there about any additions to the report and any factual inaccuracies. Does anybody wish to bring in any comments or observations at this stage? Okay, so it sounds, Kath, as though it's fairly comprehensive, minus the page numbers and typos and so on. I would request that if anybody has got anything that they wish to add, that they get back to Kath within the next couple of days by email, so that those can be included. Just bearing in mind that that will be coming back for final sign off in actually 2 weeks today, isn't it? So we would ideally need those bits of feedback by the middle of next week at the very latest. Okay, right, I will then move us on to item 10 on the agenda. So there's two bits sort of coming as one here. So we've got NHS Sheffield CCG activity and financial plan submission, and that's for what is now termed as H1, which is the first half of the financial year, which will run from April through to September. So we've got a double act on this one this afternoon, which will be Jackie and Sandy. So hand over to whoever's going to introduce that first, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Sandy Buchan, I'm Director of Commissioning Development. So if I start it off and then I'll hand over to Jackie. So the National Planning Guidance was published on the 25th of March for this year, and the paper details the financial plan for the first 6 months, as well as the draft activity plans for the same time period. The guidance itself highlights a number of priorities that we needed to embed within the planning requirements, with the main focus on continuing to meet the needs as a result of the ongoing COVID pandemic, as well as restoring services and reducing health inequalities. And the priorities as a whole are listed within the paper. This year, the plan itself required an ICS system level submission, but also by utilising the organisational and place level detail, totaling that up as the South Yorkshire Ambassador Law position. So in relation to the activity plans, the Sheffield position is in line, and what we're putting forward within this draft submission is in line with national trajectories and achieving that national target of recovery of elective activity. I have noted within the paper a number of areas of risks, with one of the biggest challenge we'll have is especially relating to seeing those patients who have been waiting in excess of 52 weeks as a result of the COVID pandemic. And that does will remain a challenge throughout the year, but obviously with plans to restore percentage of services back up to the nationally forecast areas. In light of the challenges that have been faced, and actually since the writing of this paper, South Yorkshire Ambassador Law ICS system has actually submitted an application to become an accelerator system. Now, this is a government initiative to identify systems to recover faster in terms of reducing the backlog and seeing more people, more than the 85% trajectories that they've nationally published. It would actually see an increase to between 100 and 120% of the 1920 activity value in order to reduce and deal with the backlog that we're now facing. If we're successful with that submission, the system will have access to additional monies and will share learning to other systems across the country to help with the recovery on that national scale. As part of the submission, we looked at submitting a workforce plan, a system delivery plan, and also looking at new pathways and implementation plans. And we'll find out within the next few weeks whether or not we have been successful. So even though these draft figures meet our national trajectories and forecasts, and these are what was submitted for the initial submission date, the final submission, which is in June, may have different figures in if we are successful in becoming an accelerator system. So it's just to be mindful that we will be looking at what that then means for Sheffield in being a part of delivering that level of activity to reduce our backlog. So that's what I wanted to raise in terms of the activity. I'll hand over to Jackie now in terms of the finance plans. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. So governing body will recall that we signed off an initial financial plan at our meeting in March. And at that point, we noted that that was ahead of receiving the national planning guidance as well as allocations for 2021-22. So we knew it was an initial plan at that stage, but clearly in line with our our prime financial policies, we are required to approve a budget ahead of the financial year. So we received allocations and revised planning guidance at the end of March. So at the same time as closing down the year end for 2021 and producing a set of accounts, we've also, as a team, been reviewing the financial planning assumptions that we'd initially looked at, as well as understanding the implications of the revised planning guidance. We were required to submit a financial plan ahead of this governing body, so that was submitted last Thursday. And as we discussed at governing body last month, I did send a briefing to both our senior management team, as well as Terry as chair and Anthea as our audit chair, just to ensure that we had kind of understanding of the position that we were submitting. In the paper, I've deliberately included quite a lot of detail because I think it's important that governing body understands the assumptions that I've made in terms of submitting that financial plan, as well as the risks that we are carrying in terms of that. You'll see from the paper that the initial forecast in terms of our expenditure commitments against the resources we have available would imply a forecast deficit for the first 6 months of 6.5 million. However, I've also outlined in the paper actions that I think would mitigate that forecast deficit. And on the basis of those mitigations, we have submitted a balanced financial plan. But it's important to recognise that in submitting that balanced financial plan, that doesn't mean that it will be plain sailing to deliver it. We'll need to manage a range of risks and issues over the 6-month period to be able to get there. But on the basis that we could see a scenario that would be achievable in terms of being able to deliver that, we felt the best course of action was to submit a balanced financial plan, and that would allow the CCG to focus its efforts and resources in terms of being able to deliver that. I think governing body members would recognise that any submission of a plan that wasn't balanced would bring with it some oversight and assurance from the regulators. As I say, the balance of opinion was that we'd be better to spend our time actually being able to deliver the plan than dealing with the regulatory consequences of not submitting a balanced plan. So as I say, I think there's quite a lot of detail in the paper, but I don't propose to go over that, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. So just to note, it's on the agenda front sheet what we're being asked to do with this paper, as opposed to the paper front sheet itself. And there are 3 things for a governing body to do here. One is to note the submission of activity trajectories and make and ensure that they are in line with the targets being set out in the planning guidance. The second thing is to note the submission of the balanced plan for H1, which Jackie has just referred to, and for governing body to consider the key risks and issues to the delivery of that financial plan for the first half of the financial year. So first hand was from Greg Fell, please.
Thanks, Chair. So no substantive comments on the paper itself. Just one consideration. So considering the risks and the potential opportunity, as the elective machine gets switched back on, there's an obvious risk that we will exacerbate inequality by being blunt, the sharp elbows of Dore being a bit shoutier than people in Darnall, which I think wouldn't be a good thing. We should try and avoid that at all costs. So I don't know how this would or could be operationalized, but if it were possible to differentially ensure that we address the elective care needs in a way that's mindful of the health gap, I think that would be entirely the right thing to do. As I say, I don't know how that would be operationalised, and notwithstanding the managing clinical risk bit comes first. But beyond that, I think there's an obvious opportunity to see whether we can somewhat imperceptibly, but not negligibly narrow the health gap by turning the elective machine back on in a smart way. But the thoughts on how to make it operational, which aren't for now, obviously, but just an observation.
Thanks, Greg. And I just wonder if I may, Leslie, just bring you in and Sandy in at this point, because Sandy's brought up the accelerator opportunity at SYB level, so working across South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw. And there's some implications about where the commissioning may or may not be done there. So I'm just wondering if Leslie or Sandy have got any reflections on that.
I'm happy to pick up. I think Sandy was looking to come in response to Greg's question. And that is, and I'm thinking back to when we started in the recovery process and the thought to build back fairer, and what we know about the populations most impacted by COVID also stands in terms of their access to elective care as well. So there was lots of things, including gateways, that we'd be able to start to measure and assure ourselves that we are targeting those populations. And I don't know whether Sandy, you want to pick up whether that still holds, and then we can come on to the accelerator scheme as well.
Absolutely, thanks, Leslie. So yes, Greg, reducing the health inequalities that has exactly been exacerbated by COVID and the waiting lists is one of the priorities within the actual planning guidance itself. And it asks us, as part of the decision-making process of reducing the backlog and dealing with those long waiters, to actually consider the health inequalities as part of that. Now, we've discussed that as a place. So in Sheffield, and absolutely clinical need comes at the top of anybody waiting as we turn on the tap, as you say, for elective recovery. However, as an ICS system, we're actually all working together to look at a consistent approach that actually, by that decision-making process and looking at the waiting list, that health inequalities is actually part of the decision-making process as well. So it's actually part of the narrative that we've submitted at a system level, which all places in that South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw have contributed to. And I'm happy to bring that back to governing body to really demonstrate how we are tackling and absolutely focusing on reducing health inequalities all the way through recovering the services and reducing the backlog. But it's embedded within all of the work that we're doing, from our commissioning intentions to the restoration of the services.
And then if I follow on from that with the accelerator scheme, because I think the bridge here is that additional monies to go further, faster, could amplify the position in relation to inequalities if we're not careful. Because the key learning from COVID is it's more costly and takes more time and investment to identify communities that are seldom heard and to engage with those patients in terms of accessing care. So there's always a danger when you're trying to increase the numbers of activity that you have that sort of inverse care. So again, I think separate to what Sandy has described, if we're also successful in bringing this accelerator funding into South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw, I think we need to be mindful and sighted on the impact that that is having. And indeed, if there additional resource, we might also be wanting to think about how that's used in terms of inequalities and engaging with populations who may not even have come forward for the diagnostics that would lead to their elective care.
Thank you, Leslie and Sandy, for that clarity. Comment in from Chris Neal, please.
Yeah, my issue is around the discussion that we've just had, so I'll just try and focus it on what we haven't looked at. I noticed that the inequalities is on the waiting list, but also in primary care. And also it mentioned about working collaboratively across the system to deliver on these priorities. So that's for the main resource, but in addition, you know, with the accelerator, if we can do something different with how we do this, and there is an opportunity to be more proactive through primary care and identify what coronary heart disease cases should be on their list, and are there measures where we can use some of the work with the voluntary sector that we've used in COVID to support that access. I know there's a COVID champions, and there was a champion scheme about early diagnostic of cancer, which is people from communities. So I think having those initiatives and ways in, we might not be to do it we don't want to do it everywhere, we want to do it in the more deprived areas, but having things that work and being able to, particularly value and measure that where we do pick up cases that may not have been diagnosed, so won't be in this system and may take a bit longer to realise than just doing what we did before. And I'm not saying you don't want to throw everything out, because there's some good work there, but we clearly have got some huge issues that COVID has exacerbated even more, and people will be living with that. So really welcome it. It's a really good report, and I'm pleased that the guidance is building in how we do the inequalities, but we've got to do something different really. So just agreeing with what's said, but there are some things that we can build on further in communities.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'll take a further comment from Anthea, and then maybe we'll get Sandy and Jackie to respond collectively to them. Just picking up on your point there, Chris, it's really, really worth us keeping an eye on. We've mentioned that potential of our place funding to address inequality, and we've also touched on the health inequalities framework that's being developed through our joint committee along with our colleagues in local authority. So there's some real opportunities for us to affect change and do something different, and we will be hearing about that in due course. So Anthea, please.
Quick comment for me is that how great it is to hear this commitment to inequalities or reducing inequalities, and hearing it really loudly and strongly. And I really hope that we all take that away with us as we go throughout the rest of the year and putting forward in place plans for next year. My comment was really to support Jackie, what she's saying about producing a balanced budget. I think that's the right thing to do. I think the assurances that she's given about achieving it are also the right thing to do, but I also think it's the right thing to do as we go forward into place, into an ICS, to show how well managed we are, because I suspect that not all NHS organisations within our footprint will be able to do that. And I think that being able to set us up as the strong one that does what we say we're going to do is really important as well.
Thank you, Anthea. So Sandy, Jackie, do you want to come back on any of those points?
Yeah, if I could go first. So in regards to the activity plans, I just want to make sure people see that it's not in isolation to our joint commissioning plan. So all of that joint commissioning work, that with our health inequalities underpinning all of that work, is really a part of that whole bigger picture. And so some of the things that were in the planning guidance were expected. We was always going to restore services. So we really have been working on our joint commissioning plan to really capture what was needed both in primary and secondary care into that transformational area to help with that, the next step, really. So health inequalities, absolutely. I talk about it every time I'm present to governing body. So I just want to make sure it's embedded into everything that we do. And thankfully that is now captured and identified within the national guidance as well, which is great.
Okay, thank you. Jackie?
Can I just add, it's outlined in the paper, the one area where we have submitted a 12-month financial plan, not just 6 months, is in terms of mental health. And that was in recognition of the importance of both being able to respond to the increasing demands that we've seen in terms of mental health, but also the priority in terms of continuing to make progress to deliver the long-term plan in terms of mental health. And there's a strong inequalities element within that as well. So I just wanted to draw that out.
Thanks, Jackie. Just picking up on the three things we were asked to note or consider, looking at pages 8 and 9 and in specific, noting the key risks to delivery. I just think it's probably important we just explore that in a tiny bit more detail, if we may. So there are a couple of points on there that we have noted as high risks. So one of them around prescribing and the other one around QIP. How confident, Jackie, are we as a CCG that we will be able to mitigate against those risks?
So I think there is, I think in terms of prescribing, there are many things that will happen nationally that are out with our gift. So I think the area that we would need to focus most on is our delivery of our QIP programme, and prescribing is a key element within that. There is a strong challenge because capacity remains constrained, and we've had a discussion at our senior management team this lunchtime about the ongoing draws on our CCG employed pharmacists to support the vaccination programme. So they continue to have to both do their normal work as well as delivering the vaccination programme. So there are challenges, and I think what we need to consider is innovative approaches about how we deliver some of this. So we know that we've got a strong base in terms of our primary care GP engagement around prescribing, and our prescribing quality incentive scheme has been a driver within that. So that's one of the things that we're looking to do, so that it's not just on a small number of people to be able to deliver those efficiency programs. It's embedded across practices as well. So I think that the reason I particularly rated those as high risk is for those challenges. But we will continue to look at other alternatives for delivering efficiency. And again, the work we do across ourselves and the council, and being able to make sure that our collective resources are used to good effect is an area that we continue to explore.
Thanks, Jackie. And I'll take a final comment from Lee, please.
You might not find this very helpful, but slightly controversially. I'm really interested to see that we've applied to be an accelerator site. It's welcome, and I can understand why, but looking at the figures we've seen in other papers, actually in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, we don't seem to have such a huge backlog as there is elsewhere in the country. So in terms of national inequalities, I feel slightly uncomfortable that we're bidding for more funding to reduce our waiting list even more compared to elsewhere in the city and our near neighbours. But just registering that, I understand why it's been done. So my concern is if we are given this funding, there will be an expectation that we'll do amazing things with it, because that's what the money's there for. And I'm just reflecting on a conversation I had with some of the MSK team, and when they're looking at the innovations they're bringing in, a lot of them are digital based. That immediately leads to digital exclusion. And we've got lots of other work that shows that in the city, between 25 and 30% of people are maybe digitally excluded, depending on what you're looking at. So just to come back to the health inequalities again, Sandy, I absolutely have every confidence in you, and I know that you live, sleep and breathe this stuff, but I think we mustn't underestimate the challenge there will be, because there are all these competing agendas, and we've got to be really, really mindful of that, is all I would say. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Okay. Jackie, Sandy, are you happy with the level of debate that we've gone through for those items?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I appreciate Lee's comment just now as well, and I'll make sure that that's fed back into the discussions.
Yeah, and just one final comment to note that clearly we will bring back updates to future governing body meetings in terms of progress on delivering these and any issues that governing body needs to be cited on.
Thank you both. Okay.
Terry,
Lee.
I'm really sorry, but I think this is quite an important point as well that I forgot to add on to the end, is if we're thinking about going forwards, doing things differently, addressing health inequalities, looking at a much more holistic approach, because that's what we need to do if health inequalities is central to that, then our joint commissioning with the council is absolutely key. If we're looking at well-being, then I think it just underlines what we're already doing and actually should accelerate that. And if there's any way the accelerator site allocation could be fed into that sort of work, I think it would be far more fruitful.
Okay, thanks, Lee. Right, I shall move us on now to part 3 of the agenda, which are papers for consideration. Item 11, which is paper F in the noting pack, is the month 12 performance and delivery report. So over to Kath, please.
Thanks, Chair. So as usual, I'm going to assume that everyone has read the paper and just draw out a few highlights. The highlights that I'm going to draw out is just briefly touching on the backlog of people waiting for planned treatment linked to what Sandy and Jackie have been talking about. A bit around the progress with the COVID vaccination programme, looking at how we're ensuring we make full use of the staff temperature check. And then at the end, I'm going to hand over to Sandy to pick up on the recent increase in people that have been waiting in A&E for over 12 hours. So on the backlog of people waiting for planned treatment, Sandy and Jackie have talked about the plans in place, working with our partners to manage the reduction in the backlog of people that are waiting for planned treatments in an acute setting. And the performance figures in the report show what a challenge we've got ahead of us. Growing numbers of long waiters and longer waits for diagnostics, and we've seen that happening throughout the year. And Lee touched earlier on the point I was going to make, and I've made it before, but I think it just stands out so much that in South Yorkshire we really do perform so much better than the surrounding areas and in similar areas across the country. So, for example, in February, there were 958 people waiting over 52 weeks at Sheffield Teaching Hospital. There were over 12,000 people waiting at Hull University Hospital, which is a roughly equivalent sort of hospital to STH. So it really is, you know, extremely different between the two. So that does mean that we set off, especially if we're an accelerator site as well, we set off in a very good position of knowing that we have a good history of being able to manage the elective waiting times. So we will obviously continue to use this report to monitor that and feedback to governing body. Then moving on to the progress with COVID vaccinations, we've got a little bit of information in the report. I think there's actually in Alan's report, it's got a bit on this as well. We should have spoken to each other, didn't we? Hopefully we're saying the same thing, which I'm sure we are. So as of 15th of April, 53% of Sheffield adults have been vaccinated, and within that 90% of the over 50s have been vaccinated, which is absolutely brilliant. The majority of the eligible people from the BAME background in Sheffield have been vaccinated, but the take-up is a bit lower than in the white population. And there are some geographies which show similar variation, but it's not linked to ethnicity. Lucy Ettridge, the comms lead, she's come and talked with the governing body about all the work that Sheffield's CCG with the council are funding and supporting local community groups. To co-produce messages where appropriate in community languages and taking steps to improve that uptake. And what I'd like to be able to do is show some of that in the future reports so that we can see the impact that that's having, because I think there's some really positive things there. So that's the plan, to try and be able to do that in future reports. Then moving on to the staff temperature check. So we've talked about this before. We have, I think it's about a year now this has been going, that we have what we call the temperature check with our staff, and we check in with them, ask them questions about how they're doing, and pick up on some sort of key themes and ask particular questions of the month. Some of the things that have been coming out on that have been around workload, staff being concerned about returning to the office when they'll be able to, and the organisational changes that will be taking place. So we work with the deputy directors and SMT to make sure that we're reviewing that, looking at that, and work with staff to try and address the issues that are coming up. In January, we saw that the mental health score had fallen, and we used the next 2 months to ask staff what their coping strategies are, and would they like to share that with each other in 1 month. In the next month, we asked staff about what is there anything more that the CCG can do to help you. So coping strategies at a staff briefing were shared by a couple of members of staff forum, and the deputies, I think it was last week or the week before, we all got together and we looked at both sets of information, reviewed that, and came up with lots of good ideas that we're going to take forward. One of which was during May and June, we're trialling a 12-to-1 meeting free zone, or internal CCG meeting free zone. We've got less control over meetings from outside, so we're going to try that, see if that helps well-being. We can even monitor the score and see if there is an impact. So that feels really positive, and I think we've had some good feedback on that. Yesterday we had a time management development session where we're looking at workload. There is a time management session that is run by the CCG that a few people attend. We actually had 40, I think it was about 42, 43 people attended yesterday, which was brilliant, from all levels of the organisation. And again, lots of really good ideas and discussions there that we'll review with the deputies and take forward. So that's all feeling really positive. We're currently using the temperature check to ask staff about their concerns, questions, suggestions linked to coming back to 722. And we'll build that into our plans as that starts to become a reality. So I think that's probably all I need to say on that. So the other thing to pick up, and I imagine some people have spotted this in the report, I think it's on page 94, you can see that there were 4 people that waited in A&E for over 12 hours at STH in March. And in the previous months, there's been a couple of months where there's been 1 person, but I don't think I've seen numbers like that for a while. So I thought I'd agree with Sandy, I'd hand over to Sandy and she'd just give a bit of background to that.
Thanks, Kath. So all of the 4 that are within the report and some that's been recently as well have been related to those that have attended ED with mental health issues. Now, the mental health crisis pathway in Sheffield, especially for those young people, has been quite a complicated issue that we are working as a place with all partners together to resolve the issues that we are facing within this particular pathway. We have established and are currently implementing a crisis transformation programme which looks at the whole pathway from prevention and the community, as well as then leading into when patients need admitting. And we still have found that there's been a number of issues which has resulted in these people waiting in A&E who have been waiting for admission to an inpatient bed. So at the moment we are undertaking reviews into all of these cases, and we have set up initiatives such as a Sheffield-wide protocol that all organisations have signed up to in terms of when individuals do attend A&E with mental health issues. But what I would like to propose to governing bodies, rather than me actually detail some of the issues and solutions that are being put in place and also identify some of the remaining gaps, I'd like to propose that actually we do a bit of a deep dive in this area and actually ask the mental health team and some members across the other organisations who are part of the wider transformation programme team to come into the governing body to discuss what these challenges and complications are and what we're actually doing together as a Sheffield place in order to ensure the well-being of these individuals. So that's what I would like to propose to governing body for the next public meeting.
Thank you. So anything further from Kath or Sandy on that item before I open up for questions? No. Okay. So just noting that suggestion, Sandy, that we bring back the particular issues around mental health services for a deep dive in governing body, I think that would be welcome. Just noting that our next governing body is dedicated to our annual report as an extraordinary governing body, but we will schedule it for an agenda thereafter. So if we could keep questions and sort of comments focus back on the main content of the report rather than us sort of getting tangled up around the specific mental health weights, because we will be giving that our full attention in due course. So first comment from Greg, please.
Thanks, Chair. Two very brief comments. One, I think Kath picked up on the COVID vaccination and the gap between best and worst. One of my staff very recently did an age standardised look at that. So they took age out of the mix. There's much less of a gap between best and worst than any of us had dared hope for. Testament to the work done by primary care and the voluntary and community sector for reducing that gap, because it hasn't happened by magic. So credits to both VCS and primary care for making that happen. Second brief comment, and just make sure it's on record. Thanks to the CCG and primary care for enabling us to get truly astounding COVID vaccination coverage in care home staff and domiciliary care. 82% and 70% coverage respectively. With regard to flu vaccinations, those are numbers we can only dream of. So both primary care and the CCG staff have helped inordinately with that. So thank you. It's made a massive, massive difference.
Thank you, Greg. And just picking up on some of that outstanding work, I'll keep it really brief, but the communications and engagement teams across the CCG and the Sheffield City Council teams working with communities has been so good that actually that's been picked up internationally in the news. So there's been some very good bits of work done there, and it's made a significant difference to people from BAME communities, really narrowing that gap. So thank you to teams across both organisations. Okay, Mark Gamsu, please.
Yeah, thank you. Right, okay, I'm going to be a little bit critical now. I mean, there's, in the light of the discussion that we had earlier with regard to health inequalities, and I recognise that I think we've taken a step change in terms of our focus here. But I am a bit concerned when I look at, in the report, 4.1 in the substantive report, health inequalities in Sheffield. Because I just think if we look at that, it presents a challenge to us, because first of all, the main bit that's described in there is actually, or is also exactly the same as is in the communications and engagement quarterly update. It's about the work primarily the comms team have done, and we've just reflected on that with regard to relationship with the voluntary and community sector and primary care and populations who experience disadvantage. Excellent work, but we can't be distracted from the fact that even though that is described there, this is not substantively, this section is headed Health Inequalities in Sheffield, and it majors on COVID vaccine community engagement, the work of primarily of the comms and engagement team in the relationship with the voluntary and community sector, and then some work around the population health management tool. Now, what I suppose I'm saying is, in future meetings, and indeed in the future, this won't be good enough. We're going to have something that is much more systemic. We should expect not to see, if you like, the natural champions, which to some degree the comms and engagement team, because of their responsibilities also around equality, have, but we should expect to see reports from across the organisation with regard to particular areas of commissioning with regard to inequalities. And we should expect to see key parts of the system, like primary care, actually saying this is what we're proposing, this is what is being done, and this is the data that we're using to challenge ourselves. So I suppose I'm really just putting a marker down to say, great, it's here, and I think all that is described is really good, but we are going to have to expect a step change in terms of what we talk about at this meeting going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Sandy, I can see you're going to come back on there. Just in the interest of time, we're sort of running quite behind schedule. So what I'll do is take groups of comments and we can feedback rather than getting into dialogue on individual points. So next is Lee Sorsby and then Chris Neild, please.
Thanks, Terry. So just a really quick observation, and it does relate to mental health, although I had noted it before Sandy's comments. If you look on the report, the figures for IAPT, so the target is 5.5. That's 5.5% of people with expected need are receiving IAPT. So already, I know it's a nationally set target, but we're just accepting that 19 out of 20 people will not have their need met, which has always shocked me. But anyway, but our current figure at the moment is 1.7%, and that's in the face of what we know is increased mental health need. So it's just to clock that. And I think it'd be really helpful if we do speak to the mental health team if they come back, just to understand what's being done in terms of that sort of backlog, because clearly it's not going to be sufficient for the need.
Okay, thank you. Chris, please.
Yeah, just about the inequalities and what Mark was saying. I agree that the reporting, we'd expect future going reporting to be wider, but in the inequalities group, which is what Sandy might have been coming back with, I was really impressed with the plan because it was much wider and it was very much about engaging that community in the planning, and even, you know, that finding priorities, that we still needed to do something that was much really good practice at that engagement, not just we've decided and what do you think? And I really sensed at the group we had with Brian that had moved on, but it isn't reflected in here, so that's fair enough. The other thing was about the staff temperature check, and I think there's been so much effort put into trying to do something with this. There's an acknowledgement from the staff that it's not all about what the CCG can do, and they have recognised that the CCG have done a lot. But I do feel it's kind of got more into the culture of things, that there's an expectation that people will be contributing more and having their say, that we will want to know how they're doing, that we will put on things that, that they're saying, you can see, there's sleep workshops and coffee breaks and trying to not have a meeting hour and things like that. And just the whole way that we, in terms of the staff briefings, and I think the team meetings of, you work in this situation which you haven't chose, and we want to be flexible and helpful. And this came on the back of all the organisational development we did and culture change, and just wanted to recognise the importance of that carrying on into whatever the new structure is. Sorry, that was a bit longer than I thought.
Thanks, Chris. Anthea, please.
Thank you, Terry. So my name's Anthea Morris, and I'm one of the lay members on the governing body, and that's important for my next question because there's some clinical naivety coming up into it. But my question is about the backlog, and I've heard in the press that there is a backlog of people who have not come forward to their GP over the last 12 months to even get into the queue for 2-week waits for cancer, 52 weeks for electives, name your queue. And do we think actually maybe Hull, with their 12,000 people, has just managed to get more people into their GP list and into the queue than us? And is that are we in a gap there, and that we've not seen people through the GPs? Or can the GPs tell me, actually, no, that's just a Hull problem. Sheffield's been fine. We've got the normal rate of people through. We've managed to keep some business as usual. And I just don't know where we are on that scale of things. So is it that people haven't come through, or is it that people have come through? And I think the only way we can do it is looking at numbers of people we would have expected to come through in the last 12 months versus the average over the previous 3 to 5 years. And I don't see that in this report.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting point, Anthea, and maybe we'll bring some of our GPs in to respond to that in due course. So if I could take comments from Lisa and Judy, please.
my name's Lisa Phillip. I'm one of the GPs on the governing body. I think my comment, really not really a question, was about the health inequalities and the work that has been done. I know that, you know, the comms and engagement get a lot of recognition for this, but they have put a lot of work into that. And I think the relationships between the CCG and the community groups has changed very much. And I think the feeling among the community groups has changed also. I think they're now feeling heard and empowered. And I think we can see the successes of the vaccination programme as a result of those relationships that we formed. And I think this model can be used going forward to tackle some of the other health inequalities that we have. So I think we've made great headway. It's not the end of the road. I think we've got a lot more work to do, but I think that's a great foundation and a good model of working. So just well done.
Thank you, Lisa. Judy.
Yes, following on from that, I think that's absolutely right. And that relates, I think, Lisa, to BAME communities. I wouldn't want to miss, though, if we're looking at health inequality across the piece and the impact of COVID, the impact on disabled people, particularly learning disabled, and on older people. And I think the voices of those communities are in different ways excluded. And I start to get worried if we shift our attention and all our resource to one thing, but we don't look across the piece. So in that piece about funding, delighted that funding is going to community groups, but I would say that some of those perhaps longer established groups in the voluntary sector who work across a whole range of inequalities are really under threat. So we might support one whilst another starts to drop out, and that will mean that other inequalities start to move up. So I think we ought to look at the data around the impact of COVID in that wider range of ways.
Okay, thank you, Judy. So I'll just bring Sandy in to respond on the point that she wanted to, and then just reflecting the question Anthea asked. I could see Leslie's hand went up, so we could perhaps bring Leslie in to respond to that, unless your hand's gone back down. If not, it would be helpful to hear from some of our GPs on that. So Sandy, please.
Yeah, if Kath's happy for me to talk about the health inequalities section. So the moment the outcomes framework, which underpins the joint commissioning plan that we have with the council, and is now actually going to be a Sheffield-wide adopted outcomes framework that the ACP actually want to reinforce as well and adopt across both commissioners and providers, is currently in development and is actually going to be presented to governing body in the private session a bit later on, because it is still very much in that draft form. The outcomes framework is going to triangulate both outcomes from feedback and engagement, and I'm working with Lucy in terms of a full engagement plan with various voluntary and community groups and getting their feedback into making sure that the outcomes are what is wanted by the people of Sheffield. But also, as part of that triangulation, we'll have population health management data, which I'm yet to contact Greg and his team about to help in terms of identify some of that population health information that will be used as part of this, as well as then some key metrics. So that section within the performance report will be alive with a lot of new information as part of the development of this framework. But this information is actually going to be owned by all organisations across Sheffield, both within the ACP and within joint commissioning. It is going to be informed and created and developed by both health and social care, and really is going to be what we put all our focus in and will inform those commission intentions. So it really is, it's been a mammoth piece of work to get to this point, which I will be sharing with governing body a bit later on. But I just wanted to assure you that actually, as you said, Lee, I live and breathe health inequalities, and this really is embedded within this. So this report will see a complete change and review as part of the development of that once we get that information through.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. And then if I could ask one GP or any of our other clinicians, Marion, your hand's popped up there. So if we could just take one final comment then on this paper regarding that potential backlog. We've got you on mute, Marion.
Is that better? Can you hear now? Yeah. What I would say about primary care is that working patterns have changed. We've done a lot more digitally. We've done a lot less face-to-face, but we have still made contact. And I think it's very important that the message goes out that primary care is open for business. People think we're shut. Well, we're not shut. There was a piece on ITV Calendar last night. I don't know if everybody saw it, but they rang us up and said, will you do a piece about the demand? So I was interviewed and they came and did some filming, and they're trying to make set out the message that we are very busy. And I think what's happening is there's a tidal wave that we've held back that is about to hit us. So if we think the waiting list is fairly bad now, in 3 months' time, it may well get worse. Now, what I would say is the demand is high, but the hospitals are working, and Sheffield has already got in place systems like cases where the demand is being filtered, and the ones that really do need a secondary care opinion are going through. The problem with that is there's already a waiting list at the hospital, not only for face-to-face, but also diagnostics. And the diagnostics for scans, for example, is very long. So that is a problem. I think the people who have been disadvantaged are the older adults who find the telephone and the computer more difficult to navigate than actually coming and sitting and talking. What I would like to compliment of all our colleagues is that the screening programs have continued. So cervical cytology and bowel cancer screening have continued despite everything, which is fabulous. And the other area that has relentlessly progressed is the sexual health, and that both Primary Care Sheffield and the GPs who fit coils and implants have continued to do that. They were ceased, but only for a very brief period, and they're back in normal action from probably June last year. So we're doing our best. Thank you, Terry.
Thanks, Marion. Okay, so I think we've given item 11, the performance and delivery report, quite robust consideration, lots of points for both Kath and Sandy and other members of our team to take away. So I'll move us on then to paper 12, so item 12, paper G in the noting pack, safety, quality and experience report, and hand over to Alan Windle, please.
Thank you, Chair. Alan Windle, Chief Nurse of Sheffield CCG. I don't think I mentioned that before, so apologies to everybody. I'll do the key highlights, Chair, of the report, and then open for discussion, because I think there's probably some stuff here that will raise questions. So I'll start off with our key providers to begin with, and obviously our continued support of Sheffield Health and Social Care Trust through collaboration with the local authority and ourselves, and supporting with NHS England through the Quality Board on their requires improvement status. I think it's quickly worth mentioning that what won't be in the report is that the Trust has received some bespoke visits to areas within LD, learning disability facilities at the Trust. And again, collaboratively with supporting the Trust to look at the actions that are required from those visits. The Trust continues to be remained inspected this week through its community and inpatient facilities, and the revisit of the well-led inspection will take place later this month. So pretty intensive for our mental health provider at the moment, but we're all doing as much support as we can to provide them through this inspection period. With the Sheffield Health and Social Care Trust, again, they received an unannounced visit in the last period to their maternity services. Again, there is some actions that are requested of CQC related to that inspection. And again, the CCG is overseeing and supporting the Trust on the actions that are required. And again, since the last report and prior to this report being written, we do have, which is now public, Regulation 27 that has been published within relation for the Trust regarding a incident that happened a number of years ago, and again the CCG along with partners are supporting the action plans for those, and we will continue to oversee. From a care home perspective, on our quality assurance and improvement processes, again, one of our good stories in Sheffield is the, again, collaborative work across the local authority and the CCG in supporting these independent providers through what has been a really, really difficult period. And I don't want to focus too much on COVID, but actually the COVID story for our care homes and infection control teams, the local authority quality teams, our quality teams internally. Not all to mention, we can't leave Jenny Milner out of this. It was a key cornerstone in this. It is a fantastic news story, and I'm not going to mention that we haven't had any deaths recently, because I don't want to, particularly in a good period of time, which is absolutely fantastic. And Greg may be able to comment in a little while around, you know, the infection rate is very low as well in our care homes, we're told, which is, it's just fantastic for our older care homes. General practice, done a phenomenal job in delivering the COVID programme, I have to say. We are working with 3 providers in general practice who are having some support from the CCG within relation to serious incidents. I'm pleased to say that one of those will, all 3 were historically under enhanced surveillance by the CCG, and we're now down to 2. So within the next month, we'll be reporting less on that. And again, fantastic job from primary care, delivering services in very difficult circumstances, but also be able to provide assurance on improvement and recognising learning from incidents. The final key point that I'll go into, and again, this is because it's been a fantastic secret that was maintained by directors in the CCG, is our primary care development nurse team, who have again supported primary care substantially through this COVID period and previous to, and will continue to do so. We're nominated for a Chief Nurse award, and they achieved that award. They got a silver award yesterday that was presented to them in our staff brief by the Deputy Chief Nursing Officer, Hilary Garrett. I think it's just absolutely fantastic that the nursing team, particularly supporting primary care, have achieved this award this year in the most difficult of circumstances. Happy to take any further questions on the report, Chair, but I think I wanted to absolutely sing our praises on that one, because that's just fabulous.
Okay, thank you for that update, Alan. So I'll open up for questions in a moment, but I just wanted to bring to governing body's attention the sort of 2 key items Alan picked up on in relation to CQC, and to assure governing body that there was a deep dive, robust quality assurance committee on those 2 items, which was undertaken last week, and we do as a governing body have time set aside for further discussion on that later this afternoon. So if there are any sort of particularly detailed queries and comments, if we could keep those for our next discussion, but just to assure governing body that those are on the radar and very much seriously taken. So Alan, you alluded to the fact that Greg might have some further detail for us, and Greg informs me that there's a lovely picture to come for this. So I'm going to hand over to Greg if you want to share your screen, if you are able, and if not, let one of us know and we'll do that.
Thanks, Chair. No, I've found the picture in anticipation of being asked. So this hasn't formally been published anyway yet, but this is COVID cases in care homes, staff and residents, the green line, comparing vaccination in staff the blue line, and no, sorry, staff is the yellow line and residents is the blue line. Resident vaccination rate currently about 92% there or thereabouts. Staff vaccination rate just above 80%. Neither of which have happened by magic. They've happened because the sector itself, the hospice, who've convened a lot of this work, and staff from the council, the CCG and primary care have done a huge amount of work on both vaccination, but also infection prevention control, outbreak management of cases. When that happens, the green line is the important one. Cases have gone to pretty much zero. Deaths are zero. And that, again, hasn't happened by magic. And I think it's worth reflecting on. I'm not being self-congratulatory because the care homes had a pretty tough time through the pandemic. But as a city, we have collectively stood up and done the right thing and supported the sector through that, I think, the toughest time in its history. So credits to all those who've made that so. And that is not a good news story because it's not been good, but the city has pulled together and done the right thing, and it's worth reflecting on that.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you very much for sharing that image with us. Just sort of looking at that and reflecting on my first governing body as chair, and one of the reflections that was made by Marion Sloan following on one of your presentations about vaccinations. And I can't remember which vaccination it was. May well have been flu, Greg, because that was all pre-COVID. But the reflection on the fact that vaccinations are one of the most important public health interventions we have. And I think that graph absolutely proves it. So really thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, any further questions or comments from governing body members? No. Okay, I will swiftly move us along then to the next item, item 13, paper H in the noting pack, which is the final governing body assurance framework from the 2020/21 year. And over to Kath, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I always start off by saying this is the most important document, and we have the GBAF to ensure that we're managing strategic risks that threaten our ability to achieve the strategic objectives of the CCG. Last month at the private session of governing body, I shared with you where we were at with last year, so 2021 up to 24th of February. So we were nearly at Q4, but not quite. And also we approved the proposals for the GBAF refreshed through to 21/22. So I'm kind of jumping back again to a certain extent. It's a little bit messy just to do with timings and sharing Q4 position with you, which in effect takes us on a month from what I presented last time. So as you'd expect, there's not going to be a great deal of changes in that. There's one risk linked to flu vaccine delivery in 2021 that's reduced. And the other thing I can report is at the end of the year, we had no gaps in control or assurance, which is excellent. 3 risks have reached their risk appetite, one risk being below its risk appetite. And also to highlight that the final head of report, the final head of internal audit report we haven't quite got yet. Any time now we're expecting it, but the draft opinion gave us significant assurance of a sound framework of governance, risk management and control. So we have no reason to think that we won't have that in the final opinion. And we will be bringing the Q1 position on next year to the July meeting. So I think that's the highlights from that.
Okay, thank you, Kath. Any comments at all from governing body on this paper? Okay, so governing body being asked to note the position for Q4 and consider any matters arising from that paper, and we're all happy with that. Okay, thank you, Kath.
Thank you.
And thank you to the team, particularly the risk management and governance team that have really worked hard to pull all of that together. Okay, so next item we have is item 14, paper I, communications and engagement quarterly updates. I'm going to hand over to Lucy, please.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm Lucy Ettridge. I'm the Deputy Director of Communications, Engagement and Equality. And I just want to highlight a couple of things in the report. So hopefully you have all read it. You won't be surprised to know that the team's efforts the last 3 months, or the first 3 months of the year, the vast majority of their time was taken up on comms and engagement of the vaccination programme. And hopefully you can see that their efforts have paid off. I want to highlight the comms. We've had a lot of broadcast media coverage on the vaccine, pretty much averaging at least one sort of TV piece a week. We've done lots of videos, so lots of GPs across Sheffield. You know, one of the GPs in the room, Lisa, did a video for us with community members, and they've gone down really well. So some of our videos have had a combined reach, so on lots of different platforms, so different social media and YouTube, well into 6 figures. And our reach on Twitter and Facebook in this period has gone up over 200%. So we've been doing more and reaching more people, which is great. In terms of community engagement, I'm sorry the section has been repeated in another report, but I think it's because we're so proud of it, we've put it in twice. And we have funded 26 organisations. It's a shame Jude is left, because I think we left the impression that all the organisations that we've funded are people with reach into the BAME community, and it's not. It covers lots of different communities in the city. So the work is focused on those that we know from national and local evidence are more likely to be hesitant about having a vaccine, or those that will experience barriers. So we've funded Disability Sheffield, we've funded MenCap, we've funded Together Women, who represent women that recently out of prison or maybe suffering domestic abuse. Manor and Castle, so an organisation that are in the deprived but predominantly white area of the city. Lots and lots of groups, but the vast majority of them do have reach into communities with high BAME populations. And collectively, they've done some great work. They've had many conferences. And again, we've had a few GPs in the room. So Lisa and Lee have done a few conferences. There's Greg as well, members of the programme team. They've set up helplines in community languages. So people want to have a chat or concerns about the vaccine, want to understand, you know, about the development, the safety. We've given all these community groups key messages, our frequently asked questions. They've got a lot of information. And these helplines are in Urdu and Arabic, Somali, Punjabi. They've done loads of videos, they've done pop-up information sessions. And I know Greg touched upon it before, so I was really pleased to say that actually our take-up rates are, because of the work of PCNs, but also community, voluntary sector, is sterling efforts, and that work is continuing. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lucy. Any questions or reflections for comms and engagement? Mark, please.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wasn't complaining about the fact. I was very pleased that the comms and engagement work appears in 2 reports, Lucy. But I think the one bit you haven't touched on, and I know why, but is, well, one of the things that we did, and this is that we are very concerned with regard to Speak, that the work that we've done and the relationships that have been developed and the skills and experience that we have is strengthened and built on as we move through this transition year. And so Lucy and her team convened a special meeting of Speak a few weeks ago, when we started to think through the ideas around producing a discussion document that really starts to try and say, going forward, this is what we need to hold on to, both with regard to capability and relationships and so forth. And Lucy's had a first stab at producing a summary of that discussion, which will be coming back out to a range of partners, but obviously back to governing bodies. So it's really important that I'm just flagging up that that's something for us to expect really going forwards.
Yeah, apologies about that. I think we didn't appreciate it was in this period. You're right, it was the 31st of March. I think we thought it would be for the next report. So yeah, I didn't flag it, but thank you, Mark.
I'm just flagging it up, Lucy. I know it's going to come.
No, thank you. No, it was the last day of this period, so that's my excuse.
Thank you. Any further comments or reflections? Okay, so thank you, Lucy and team, for all of that work and for the update to governing body. Okay, next item on the agenda, item 15, integrating care, and that's an oral update, and I'm going to hand over to Leslie to update on that. Just to note, for governing body, previously we had two separate items, one entitled Integrated Care System Update and one Accountable Care System Update. And what we've decided to do is, often they're very closely related to one another. This is all related to the Integrating Care agenda. So this item will now be renamed Integrating Care as a standing item from now on. Okay, over to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. So I am conscious of time, and therefore I think I'd just like to focus on very briefly the proposed legislation and link the key things from that we need to be cited on as a governing body back to the conversation and the themes that we've had throughout the whole of the afternoon. So the legislation beginning to wind its way through Parliament, an expectation that it will come out at the end, similar to how it has gone into the process. However, if we think back to 2012-13, I think there were many changes to proposed legislation as it went through its journey. So a couple of things to pick up from that. And I think the important thing in relation to the conversation that we've had today is a statutory integrated care system, a statutory entity made up of two components, two discrete components, one being a health and care partnership and one being a statutory NHS board. Now, the health and care partnership will also be underpinned in legislation by a duty to collaborate, which will be a duty on NHS and our local authority partners. I think that is really important that we think very carefully about the health and care partnership. It is the opportunity to shape the wider plan and to be cognizant of all that we've spoken about this afternoon in terms of inequalities and the allocation of resource, how we build back fairer, and the NHS as a good partner making its contribution to the local economy and to sustainability going forward. So it's a really important piece of the architecture. It's designed to shape the wider plan for the integrated healthcare system, being cognizant of our joint strategic needs assessments and our health and wellbeing board strategies. And it should therefore shape the delivery plan of the NHS statutory board. And why that's important, I think it was Lee who expressed earlier that about the NHS having the resource but not the control, and how we work with our local authority partners. If that lands in the way it's intended and we seize the opportunities, that gives the scope for partners to really influence how an NHS statutory body allocates its resource in the future. I think that's really important. Also within there, we picked up throughout this afternoon about our joint commissioning, our joint plan, our outcomes framework, our pooled resource, and how we've really got a step change in our legacy, and we want to see that carry into the future. I think the other thing to be cognizant of is that recognising both the role of health and wellbeing boards and joint committees is included within the white paper and the proposed legislation, and therefore there is an opportunity for us to make sure that that legacy continues. Couple of things in relation to integrated care systems. We have already published with staff the intent which outlines the primacy of place. So although we have a mechanism that would see employment commitments move to an ICS, we're really cognizant that for most of our staff, it will mean that they will continue to do the work that they do in place. So for Sheffield, that is the concept of Team Sheffield and a place director being able to continue the work that we've done and our input to joint commissioning and those pooled resources. So that sits Sheffield potentially in a good place, and we just need to be mindful that we keep our eye, that we don't just lose some of those opportunities that are there. And then I think finally thinking about Team Sheffield, that is within our gift to be cognizant of how we shape the work of Team Sheffield, working from individuals in their communities with their general practice wrapped around them and their primary care networks out to our 4 localities and to Sheffield as a place. And Mark touched upon that step change in our patient and public involvement and engagement work. But actually what we've done in the vaccine programme stands us in really good stead for everything, because the way that we've engaged with communities in terms of addressing inequalities isn't just for the vaccination programme, isn't it? It should shape everything that we do from now on in, and we should be able to build on that. So as we think about Team Sheffield, I think we do need to be really thoughtful about what are the elements of the work that we do that we want to augment and expand and do more of that will be important for the future. So those are just the key things that I wanted to highlight. I just wanted to pull out a few things that we just need to be cited on, because quite often when we look at this, we can get caught up on if there's no CCG and there's an ICS, what does that mean, rather than being more thoughtful about what are some of the components that we need to make sure work well for the people of Sheffield in the future.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Any questions or reflections for Leslie? So Greg, please.
I did say that you answered to Terry that you answered the question. I was hugely reassured by what you said, actually, and I was surprised to be so reassured. I might actually read the legislation myself. I suppose two questions. There's something about operating at a place level with the organisations at place, and I think the answer to this will be no. Does the legislation say anything about the relationship between the ICS at sub-regional level and, for us, the mayoral combined authority or a collective of local authorities? Second observation is, I'm not sure it's an observation, but the ICS needs to be powerful enough to overcome organisational specific thinking. We know that that's the default of all of our organisations, including mine, to think about populations and places, and that's the key challenge that needs to be brought off. And I think that can't be done by legislation alone, but I think it is something to reflect on as we go forward.
Thank you, Greg. I think there is nothing specific around combined authority and the way that works. I think we'll need to work some of that through both combined authorities and Sheffield City Region and the link to the ICS in the future and how we make the most of that. And I think that kind of relates to your second point, which is more about when we get into siloed thinking in terms of organisations. And yes, I think I fully agree with you on the second point.
Thank you. Any further comments? Nope. Okay. Thank you, Leslie, for that very helpful and clear update. And I will now move us on to the final part of the agenda, which is part 5. There were a number of reports circulated in advance for noting. Does anybody have any comments or specific issues on any of the noting papers to bring up now? Okay, I've not been notified of any other business in advance. So as always, I know we're running slightly behind time, but if I can take one reflection from a GP, one from a lay member and one from our executive team on what we've discussed this afternoon. and what you will go away and tell your teams that would be most grateful. So hands up if you want to volunteer, and if not, I will volunteer you. Okay, I'm going to volunteer Lisa. Do you have any reflections on what we've discussed that you will go away and take into your localities, into your citywide discussions with GPs?
I think regarding the workload and the the potential tidal wave, just sort of getting a plan together and how we deal with that. Just letting our patients know that we're still there, we're still open, we're still seeing people, and just trying to manage that going forward, with the help of our patients in our area. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone from the executive team? So Jackie's microphone off there. Away you go.
I suppose we're at that point in the year where we're finishing one year and moving on to another. And I think my reflection is a lot of what we've talked about for the previous years give us a really strong underpinning for where we want to go. So not just over the next 6 to 12 months, but going forward. So the Joint Commissioning Plan, the Health Inequalities Outcomes Framework, the comms and engagement, and that working across our partner organisations, I think is a really strong message about what's gone well. And obviously the challenges remain, there's still lots to do. So we should take comfort in some of the successes, but really be focused on the things we still need to make improvements on.
Okay, thank you. Anthea?
Succinctly, the commitment to inequalities that we heard in that discussion, I thought rang very true.
Thank you. And I've got an additional hand up here, and I'm going to let it through because reflections are always good. Lee, please.
Oh, sorry, Terry. It was this private message to you just to say it wasn't for lack of interest. But now you've given me the microphone. Yeah, I think my reflections were actually that we seem to be coming through the other side of COVID. And I know we say that very, very tentatively, but actually I just feel really, really grateful to be part of a system that has worked together so well, which does feel a fantastic place to be. And when we're thinking about place, I think that I'm really grateful for that, and a huge testament to the amount of work that we've got. But also, as Jackie says, at the same time as we're sort of stumbling out of that, trying to recover the task that we're facing in terms of catch up, but also new ways of working and new ways of working within social care as well. And that sort of holistic approach to health is a huge challenge, but I feel confident about it because of the way we got through COVID.
Okay, thank you, Lee, and thank you for everyone else for your reflections. So I will bring the meeting to a close now. Just to notify members of the public, there will be a short governing body in public, and that will be on the 20th of May at 2 p.m. And that is for us to receive our audited annual accounts and also to reflect on the annual report and some of the really important and great work that Sheffield CCG has done over the past 12 months.